Welcome to the 915 Forum.
Yes.
It's great to have you all here. We are kicking off a new series that will run through the season of Epiphany these next 5 weeks. I always advertise these things, and I say with, in this case, Kathleen Norris, and the people who know who she is go, "Oh my gosh, you guys got Kathleen Norris? Wow!" And look at the fight via DVD. But Gertrude Mueller-Nelson saw this on Facebook, and she's like, "Tell her hi for me. I'm a big friend of her." Anyway, great to have you all here. So we're going to do this, and embracing a life of meaning is the forum topic, and each week we'll tackle a different piece of that. But first, just as a high-level thing, why this topic during Epiphany? Take a look at this. This is my understanding of Epiphany in a nutshell. The season of Epiphany, or at least one way of describing it. We draw people to Christ not by loudly discrediting what they believe, by telling them how they are wrong and how we are right, but by showing them a light that is so lovely that they want with all their hearts to know the source of it. That was essentially my sermon last week on living questionable lives. And that is how the season of Epiphany, for me, is lived out. It's how we show the light of Christ to the world. And in some cases, bring forth the light of Christ that's already out there, right? So last year, we did a whole series on how we live that out in the world. So it was kind of an evangelism series. We had different people come in and share their experiences. One person shared how they were acting as almost like a chaplain in their workplace, right? And they were kind of trying to show the love of Christ in their daily life, at work, at the water cooler, to the person in the cubicle next to them. And we had another couple come and say how they've been trying to do that work in their neighborhood by opening their home every Friday night to whoever, right? Open dinner to the neighborhood of Ocean Beach on Friday nights, right? And just letting the Spirit guide them. No big agenda other than to just create community. So that was last year. We were kind of going outside, if you will. And I thought, as a kind of a change of pace, it might be interesting to go inside. And that is, I think this idea of embracing meaning in our life, that is the fuel of the light of Christ that we're trying to show. And so it can't always be the exterior. We have to pay attention to the interior as well. So I thought maybe this season we would do an interior journey about what is it in our lives that give us meaning such that our lives would show the light of Christ in a way that would get people's attention. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and kick this thing off, and it's kind of a guided deal. So they'll start with a little introduction about what gives you meaning, and then maybe we'll turn it around and ask you those same questions. There's some discussion questions each week. So if you grab them when you came in, that'll be something we'll just look at, or you can use that during the week after class just to sort of go deeper with this conversation. Okay? And I'll try to get these up on our YouTube channel each week, so if you miss your class, you can check it out. Okay, so this week we're going to be talking about belief. So without further ado, and who better than a poet, right, to be our facilitator?
Hello, friends, and welcome to this first session in the series, Embracing a Life of Meaning. My name is Tim Scora, and I'm here as a facilitator of a small group in Denver, actually, at St. John's Cathedral on this day in September. Now, you might be watching this at any time in the year, and we are here to greet you and all together to say welcome to this program, to this first session. And I'm going to ask the friends that gathered with me here at St. John's to introduce themselves with particular relevance to the theme of this series, A Life of Meaning. And I've asked each of them just to say what is having meaning in their lives right now. And we're going to start with Rebecca.
Just my name and what's giving meaning, or
That's,
what I do?
yeah.
Okay,
Just,
name.
Mhm.
Rebecca Crummy. And what is giving meaning to my life right now is I got married for the first time in my early 40s, 3.5 months ago. And so that adjustment of going from a single life to a shared life is a joy, mostly a joy, but readjusting and learning to live with someone else who's wonderful and marvelous for the first time. That's where I'm finding meaning.
Thank you.
I'm Margaret Johnson, and I'm 2 weeks away from my 89th birthday, and my husband's 2 weeks away from his 88th. And at dinner last night, we were talking about our 62 years, how instead of life being over, we are anticipating the next 10 with vitality. And I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah.
My name is Amanda Montague, and I think for me, what's giving me meaning is currently I stay at home with my children. Well, my one child has just started first grade, so I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I would hear people talk about having children and how it just brings another element to your life, and I think right now, being with my children is very special.
Thank you.
I'm Kathleen Norris, and I think what's giving my life meaning right now is that for the first time in many years we have a baby in the family. I am a great aunt to my grandniece, who is almost 1 year old, and I have been privileged this year to be with her at several, first at 4 months, then at 6 months, 8 months, and now 10 months and 11 months, and just to see the amazing progress of learning, constant learning and changing that an infant goes through. And it also is teaching me what it means to be a member of the older generation, to be in the grandparent generation.
I'm Kim McPherson, and one of the things that is giving great meaning to my life in the last year is that I've started doing centering prayer, and find that I read in this one book, The Wisdom Jesus, about sitting down to make yourself available to God, and that has just shaped my whole day when I'm able to do that.
I am Maria Mercedes Bejarano, and excuse me, after 37 years of living in the metropolitan Washington, D.C. area, I packed my bags, sold the house, and I am here in the beautiful city of Denver. And it's a transition like I've never experienced before. I am digging deeper for meaning. I am grateful for this place, for the people I've met, for becoming a grandmother. Having Matilda in my life is a true gift of God and joy. And all the new experiences, but I'm looking for more depth. And I want to really be useful to others and to God mostly. And I want to know what Denver offers for that. Thank you.
Thank you. And my name's Tim Scora. And one of the things that gives me meaning is that I'm a Canadian in the midst of Americans. And so I've traveled here from Vancouver. I actually live on an island, just a 20-minute ferry ride from Vancouver, called Bowen Island. And I've been there for almost 5 years now. My wife and I moved from the interior of British Columbia to this island and live next door to our daughter and son-in-law and 2 grandsons. And my vegetable garden goes right adjacent to my daughter's vegetable garden. So right now at harvest time, that is a wonderful place of meaning for me. Yeah. So, what a lovely group. And folks...
So, you knew this was coming, right? What gives your life meaning at the moment? That's our first question on our little discussion question. So, having those lovely people go first, take a moment to turn to someone maybe who you don't know very well, or maybe you've never seen before in your life. So move around a little bit if you have to. There's some empty chairs here. And introduce yourself and share what's giving your life meaning in this moment. I can tell you, for me, being a dad is a new chapter in my life for sure. Every day it feels like I'm finding new ways to fail at that job and to learn how to do it better. And but it's a lovely, amazing beginning of what I can see is clearly a journey that I can only begin to appreciate where that's going to take me next. I don't know, but it's giving me a new sense of meaning in my life because my life suddenly took a back seat in my own life, and now I'm putting theirs so much further ahead of mine. It's different, and it gives a new purpose to my life in a new way, and I'm sure other parents can appreciate that as well. So whatever happens to be in yours at the moment, does that sound good? Let's take just a couple minutes and do that, maybe a couple minutes each, and then we'll come back. Okay. Ready, set, go. Maybe if you have to do a little triad, that's okay too.
I think I'm very crazy. I think I'm very greedy. But also now is like my friends are like right responsibility. Because I do a bunch of like service and stuff like that. Like responsibility at school and that's what so much fun. And it's like, I don't know, I love crying. It's like stupid like water. Like all my friends, but also responsibility. I always have a lot of responsibility. I feel like I go everywhere. Yeah, it makes me feel like I just like my dad's priest, I always feel like I was like responsibility.
I didn't even butt in, by the way.
That's my story about physical I am an absolute believer.
Wow.
Totally changed my mind. Simplicity of the instruction, exercises, I thought, I'm wasting my time. When someone gave me a can of Campbell soup, and they said, now, do this, and then something with clay, and then wrap it around.
Has that always been true? Those things giving your life?
I didn't even know I had real pain from they actually told me on the ceiling from the pain. I thought, maybe I am in the wrong place. I want to tell you it changed my whatever they did, whatever magic it was.
It's like now I've got friends that I met through church, like through school leader and through school that like I know that I can like 100% like count on, and I didn't used to have that like before I started doing more communities and stuff. And before, like my mom used to make friends for me, you know, like that kind of thing. So now I know how to like I don't know, make my own friends.
Very simple, yeah. Even I can talk. I've been retired for 20 years. I didn't get to the things that I wanted to do when I retired. I've been busy doing the things that I did as a professional. I'm busy with personal errands because but I have also been busy the last 6 years with
That's the fun.
the network and primarily raising funds. I don't do that well. I can help in organization. I've been on the board. And I'm also involved with the Tour de Elegance. It's been kind of service to, because I can do it. And it wasn't any big thing, it's kind of a continuation of what I did after I retired.
Okay. Has everybody had a chance to go? Has everyone had a chance?
I really like to get back to writing. Anxious to get back into it.
Thank you for doing that. I hope everybody met somebody new. We'll keep that conversation going as we move through the series, each week focusing on a different aspect. So this week it's going to be how do we draw meaning from our beliefs? Okay, that's kind of the focus this week. So we'll go ahead and run this, and my suggestion is, as you listen, just make notes of 2 or 3 things or whatever that jumps out at you. Okay, and then at the end we'll sort of do some reflection on what did we hear that struck us, what did we hear that we maybe didn't agree with. That's okay too, right? And just, okay, so then we'll just play that by ear and we'll try to wrap up. Try to leave about 15 minutes for that at the end.
I'm glad that you've had a chance to meet us as a collective. You're going to be hearing from us, but the way that this works is that first of all we hear from our teacher, who in this case is Kathleen Norris. And so Kathleen is going to speak for 10, 12 minutes, whatever feels right to her. And then we're going to respond to her teaching. So we're looking forward to engaging with one another, with Kathleen, and indirectly with you. Because what we're doing is intended to feed conversation and learning wherever you are in your small groups. So that's the way it works. More instruction later, but for now, let's turn to Kathleen Norris, our teacher, for embracing a life of meaning. Kathleen.
Well, the first subject I'd like to talk about is belief and why it matters. I've come to think of belief as not something that I have or don't have, but a lifelong process. So I'll start by talking a little bit about my own journey. I think the fact that I was singing in church choirs from the time I was 4 years old probably has more to do with my beliefs and my spiritual development than any catechism I learned as a teenager. Because there was that physical joy of singing. You know, there's a wonderful ancient saying that when we sing, we pray twice. I've always loved that. And there's also the poetic language of hymns. In worship, the hymns always come before the sermons for a good reason. If we are to become believers, we need that immersion into poetry. Not our ordinary speech, but poetry. When I was a young adult, I simply drifted away from church. I thought religion was something that I had outgrown, and in fact, I think the culture encouraged me to think that. But by the time I was in my mid-30s, I became restless. I was looking for something more. My big surprise was that this something more could be found in the Christian tradition that I had discarded, a rich legacy of prayers and biblical interpretations, and also community. Well, I've been a churchgoer now for about 25 years, and in discussing what belief means to me now, I'll share a few conclusions that I've reached. First, I think the Christian faith is countercultural. If the world tells us what you see is what you get, and Christianity denies that. It asks us to look for something more. It points to greater and deeper things. Not necessarily otherworldly things. I think a lot of my faith, I think I'm encouraged to look for the holy and sacred that's hidden in ordinary life. Second, because Christianity is countercultural, the culture reacts to it in very negative ways. Scorn, ridicule, dismissing, and ignoring the faith as irrelevant, anachronistic in the modern world. I think one of the main ways that we see Christianity negated is in media coverage. Almost all the press is given to the most extreme right-wing Christians, so that many people are convinced that that's the only form of Christianity. I think a similar thing happens with Muslims. Third, and most important for my concerns, is that we ourselves resist the countercultural nature of Christianity. At its very heart, this religion insists that God is always there for us, loving, forgiving us, and welcoming us as we are. Jesus exemplifies this love of God for us. And we're asked to respond to this great love by doing likewise, treating others as we would wish to be treated, loving, forgiving, and welcoming even the difficult people, the alien, the poor, and the stranger. I think the history that we find in the Bible, and I think the history of the Christian faith, shows that most of us manage to resist and reject this core message most of the time. And our rejection takes many forms. People may cling to a bad self-image so that they reject God's forgiveness. Or they may have such an inflated self-image that they can't admit that they have any need for God. Others hide behind tribalism, nationalism, wealth, and status in order to avoid that uncomfortable call to love and serve others who are not like them. So there are my 3 observations. And I'd like to add that I think one of the biggest problems we have with the concept of belief today is how illiterate most of us are when it comes to the Bible and Christian tradition. I count myself very lucky that in beginning to explore my faith, I became aware of how ignorant I was, so I set out to explore and take a fresh look at my own tradition. I'm a storyteller. That's how I make sense of the world, by finding the experiences and metaphors that tell me something, that give me some insight into meaning. And in my exploration, I was relieved to find some excellent precedent for this in Christianity. When Jesus is asked, "Who is my neighbor?" he doesn't give a discourse on the concept of neighbor. He says, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and he fell into the hands of robbers." He answered with the story that we have come to know as the parable of the Good Samaritan. Well, the storytelling made me feel right at home, as did the significance of words themselves in the Christian tradition, words such as belief. But I first needed to shed some of my cultural conditioning. To ask, "What do you believe?" is not at all the same as asking, "What do you think?" And I think a lot of us tend to think that if I ask, "What do you believe?" I'm really asking, "What are your ideas about this? What do you think?" But the origin of the verb to believe means to give your heart to, which is a much richer and deeper thing than just, it comes from your whole self and not just your intellect. Belief is not a list of things that you know for certain. It's much richer than that. And also more subtle. In a way, I think belief always contains within it the seeds of doubt. To believe, we need to be able to trust in God and in each other, and that kind of trust is increasingly hard to come by in our polarized and polarizing culture. We need belief more than ever to help us live together. But how to believe? I think that's a lot harder question than what to believe. How to believe? Well, it's a process and it can take some time. There's no quick fixes here. I remember when a monk was pressed by a journalist to describe what she imagined must be his spectacular religious experiences, he answered simply, "I go to church." And I think that's a good place to begin to find what we believe, what we give our heart to. Worship, with all its repetitions and hymns and prayers, is meant to fortify our belief and make us feel at home in a community of other people who are also struggling with their own belief. Worship is behavior. It's whole body religion. We stand, we kneel, we read aloud, we sing, we listen. Even in the most non-liturgical, head-oriented Protestant worship, We're often asked to say and sing the words of hymns and creeds that we don't fully understand. And that's the point. I think it's precisely by saying these words, repeating them with others, that these words can come to have some meaning for us. Over time, our very use of them can give them context and meaning. Creeds are a perfect example of this. I used to hate them, but I have finally come to terms with them. In some ways, the Nicene Creed is just the family story we Christians like to tell. In other ways, with the strange phrases like light from light and true God from true God, it's as if we're all suddenly speaking in tongues. We don't know what we mean. And that's okay with me. As a poet, I am used to saying things I don't fully comprehend. What the poet William Stafford said about poetry is also true of prayers and creeds. Successful people cannot find poems, for you must kneel down and explore for them. The mathematician Bernard Riemann once said, "I did not find those pairs of differential equations. I found them in the world where God had hidden them." That's an insight that's been of great significance to me. I think it reveals a great truth, that the metaphors I use in my poems, the stories I tell are out there in the world. Part of the fabric of the world is created by God. I don't invent them because I'm creative. I only discover them, or more accurately, I stumble across them. There are things I can do to make myself more receptive to these discoveries: prayer, the practice of silence, and trying to avoid distractions, limiting my use of television and the internet. But mainly I find that belief is simply a matter of paying attention to the world around me, to the little ordinary things that are so easy for me to overlook, but they will reward me beautifully if I give my heart to them, if I believe.
Wow, Kathleen, thank you. And I just, there are so many places I could land. I've landed, but then you led me on to something else. It's just so rich. And so what I'm going to ask us as a group to do is to begin our conversation. And there may be a place in that sharing that you want to start. You know, I just want to go to that, what you said about repetition. Or what you said, how you redefine belief for me today. Whatever it is, take us there, and we'll follow the path of the conversation. And Kathleen, feel free, as new things occur to you that are extensions of your initial presentation, to offer those, so that this tapestry that we're going to shape together will be as beautiful as this initial presentation by Kathleen. So who would like to begin? Margaret, you ready?
I love that you started out with the word belief, because it took me to a place where I realized my beliefs change every day. But I was raised Southern Baptist and was in that for 25 years, where belief was everything. And it wasn't so much living as believing. And then moving into the congregational faith, which invited that. But it wasn't until I began meditating 37 years ago that I became open to allowing myself to be changed every day, every moment. And it's still happening. It's like something new comes along. So it's like, am I being here now, present, and living from that place? And it takes, as Kim said, for me it takes an hour of simmering prayer a day to stay there. But I'm open to every day there's a new belief, living in a new place.
I think what struck me was you were talking about how this is a process that goes on for a long time, and Margaret just underscored that. And it's one of the things that I love to share with some of the young people that I work with, that this isn't just something that happens one day and boom, that's it, you've got it all. You just keep discovering, and the doubts creep in, and you keep wrestling with them, and it's a journey. It's a lifelong journey. And I'm beginning to see also as I get older that I think it gets better. You know, it's not one of those things that you hit a high and then everything's a low after it. I think it just keeps getting better and better. And that's a real, that's a little parable in itself, I think.
Yeah, I think, you know, in my experience, I think when you start to shed the self-consciousness and the fears that you have as adolescents and maybe young adults, and maybe the tradition that you were raised in was very strict and you're sort of leaving that and not too sure of yourself. But when you start to get free from fear, I think that's when you find that it really does get better, that it is a process in which you are growing without fear. And I think that's one of the great gifts that belief can bring.
I was struck by hearing how belief is so counter everything. Counter culture, counter every breath. And particularly in this culture and in many cultures, you appear like an odd person, like, you know, do you think? They ask you, do you think? Well, I believe. I love your definition of believing. Putting my heart into. Putting my heart into. And it's a process, I agree with that. I also believe that it starts with me to be able to impact, to be able to change, if there's any change that I can affect. It will start with me. And that's a hard process. I'm using all the resources I can withdraw right now from aging. Becoming a grandmother has been really a true experience. Because seeing this new life and this young child and infant, there is such closeness to the Creator that even without her words, it doesn't matter. With her eyes, you can see there is something I want to learn, that this child is showing me, and I want to learn about myself, because I had that.
But you know, I was, one of the things you were talking about, Kathleen, was the creed, the Nicene Creed. And it's funny because for a while, when I arrived in the United States, I was raised an Anglican. And, you know, when I was with, you know, going to church with my parents and all of that, I just assumed I believe in, I learned to, you know, and you just skim over, barely understanding anything. And so then I came to the United States, I got married, came to the US, and for a while, my husband and I, he's actually raised Baptist, Southern Baptist too, so we then went to a Baptist church. And, you know, I sat in there and I was like, something, you know, there's just, the scenery's not great. It's almost like being in a convention center. So, you know, all of that I was used to, you know, sitting in a church with the tinted windows and all of that. Anyway, I finally found St. John's, and I remember when, you know, they said stand, sit, kneel. I was like, wow, I'm home. And then the Nicene Creed, and I was like, oh my goodness, you know, and it was literally like coming home. So that, you know, the creed definitely has a significance for me in that sense.
I partly mentioned it because so many people have difficulty. I'm going to an Episcopal church now, and I know there are some people who will not say the creed. It just bugs me too much. And I tell them, friends of mine, I say, well, I was there once. I really hated it. I don't know what this is all about. But after being in church for a while, I did begin, this is the family story. It's the story you might tell at the family reunion about what happened. And of course, there's all this theological history with it and everything, but it's our story. It's the story that the church has chosen to tell for so many thousands of years. And so it's not my, what I think about it. something bigger than that. It's our story, and I really am more comfortable with it. I do laugh sometimes. I think we're all speaking in tongues. None of us have any idea what we're saying, and that's fine. And then, you know, and then if you really want to look at some very creeds that seem very strange to modern ears, would be to go to the Orthodox churches, because they have these elaborate, very poetic imagery and all this kind of stuff. And so sometimes I try to scare my friends, if you don't like this creed, go look at that one, because that will really knock your socks off, and you'll really not want to say that one. But I just think I have been shedding some of my own preoccupations, my own resistance, my own fears, just in the practice of worshiping. It's really helped. And the other thing that I think is that a lot of us, when we grow up in the church, we sort of go along with our parents. And that's kind of what we do. But then as we become young adults, we really have to rediscover the faith on our own. And it may take us to another religion. We may become Buddhist. I think my favorite story was of a Southern Baptist man who became a Russian Orthodox bishop. I mean, people make these claims. And I remember I was on the vestry of this Episcopal church. We had our first vestry retreat. In just our discussion, we discovered that every one of us, including the pastor, had been away from the church for a while. And what drew you back? How did it feel like coming home when you came back? That kind of thing. Why this church? All of that. It was a very fruitful discussion, but I think it reinforced that thing that we can accept our parents' belief up to a point, but at a certain point, we may leave, we may not leave, but we have to make the religion our own and decide what it is we believe.
You know, when we were talking about what gives meaning to our lives,
I'm going to go ahead and end it there. Just, whetting our appetite and to give us a chance to feedback ourselves. How does that sound? Boy, I wonder if we should do a class on the creed. After that. Using these discussion questions as a guide, if you like, for your own thoughts. There's a lot there. What struck you? What did you hear that was interesting?
I'll go.
Yeah.
I love the support for the idea that faith is a process, that almost somebody said to me something like, some certainty is the opposite of faith, or something like that. There's some kind of quotes like that.
Anybody know that one?
And I love that because I also left a church for many years and just came back, and I've never been to Episcopal before, so I'm glad that I'm not the only person that doesn't get the creed. And but like the faith that I came from was telling me there was only one way to think and believe. And I felt like I had to have like a secret relationship with Jesus and God, that not tell them about it because I was going to get in trouble. And but it felt more real to me, And so now I feel like I can come back as an adult into a community that actually supports the way I originally felt in the beginning. So that's my coming home. And I didn't know, but my whole life I thought I was the only one that could think like that, was so alone with it. And then I started hearing all the right-wing stuff, and in my mind I decided that's what Christianity must be. And when they said that people think of Muslims the same way, and I was thinking, wow, I fell victim to that for a long time. So.
Yeah, I heard her mention right-wing, and I heard you just mention it, so maybe a better term would be more fundamentalist approach to Christianity, or more literalistic approach, something like that.
Well, it's very definite. I think that's the thing. It's very rule based. It's very dogma based.
Right.
And essentially, what dogma doesn't allow you to do is to find your own path, and it may not be the same as anyone else's, but find your own path. And I actually was born Catholic and raised Catholic, and by high school I was like, I'm not going to buy into your dogma about a lot of things because it's too confined. It doesn't allow that individuality.
As you discussed, there's some point where you have to, the religion of your parents can only take you so far. At
Right,
some point,
yeah.
you have to own it yourself. Do people relate to that idea?
Absolutely.
I hear that, that's a classic, sort of thing that we come to at a certain point. But I've heard other people who don't really, it's a new idea to them, that faith is a journey. That's not everybody, that's not natural to everyone. That's something that, just they weren't raised with that. They were really raised more from the approach of belief and tradition. You know, I remember I once had somebody tell me, spiritual journey, Chris, I'm not on a spiritual journey. I was born in the Episcopal Church. Done. How about you guys? How do you relate to this idea of faith as a journey?
You guys are young.
I saw you nodding your heads when they said your parents bring you to church.
Put him on the spot.
Well, chime in as you feel moved. How about this idea?
I would like to affirm the first speaker. What is your name? Allie.
Yep.
Allie. Thank you, Allie. Because it wasn't really until I started participating in Education for Ministry, which we had last year, and hopefully we'll have again that program in our church, but that I heard or got the idea that I didn't have to be 100% believer in order to pursue believing. And like the mustard seed, I keep thinking I'm a mustard seed person. That's how much faith I have, but then I've come away from measuring faith in that way, and it's nothing but liberating.
Yeah, how about this idea of belief as that which you give your heart to? That's actually the Greek translation in the New Testament. Versus what we typically understand when we hear that term, that which I agree with to a certainty as real. Much more of an intellectual. Is that a new idea to people? How did that strike you?
Well, I think you're going to live your beliefs. I think beliefs are internalized, and you can think all different kinds of things, but actually how you live, I think, is based on what you would believe, is kind of how I took it, or how I think.
Well, I think too, thinking is, like they say, very intellectual, and so, but believing, it's your ego is disconnected from belief. Thinking, your ego is very much part of that process. And so when we were doing the whole previous series last year about when we were talking about, going past who was the guy that did the Richard Rohr, yeah, that whole series, and that was all about getting out of your ego when you think about religion.
Yeah, one of the things I lead a Bible study on Mondays at noon, and it's really easy for us to get into a discussion of, well, what happened? What's the reality of what just happened in this passage or whatever?
Yeah.
What is God trying to say? What do they mean? Or this kind of thing. It's very easy. I think it's the natural first place to go is, let's figure this out. Let's figure this out. And I'm always trying to blend, add to that. Well, how has that been true in your life? How does that speak to your heart? Where does that resonate here, not here?
Right. Yes.
And that's it's a harder thing to do.
As opposed to maybe saying, what do you think about that?
Mm-hmm.
It's more like, how does this make you feel? Right? Because feeling comes more from the heart.
Yeah, transformation comes through that which you give your heart to more than the things that you intellectually think are true. I think that's think that's true for me at least. Other feedback.
I took Bill's class on the Old Testament last year, and every week it was making my head explode. It wasn't capturing in my brain. Bill was very good at calming me down and telling me, you have to look at this stuff metaphorically. I'm sort of a literal guy, so go back to belief,
Yeah, right. Yeah,
back to belief.
that's a big part of it.
That's very good.
Yeah, so when Episcopalians talk about both and, right, that tends to get our certain folks hear that and go, wait a minute. It's right and wrong. It's truth or not truth. Yeah, all of that's why Jesus never answers a straight question, right? It's always answered through a parable or a story, through poetry, through metaphor.
Yeah, because it's not black and white, right?
I think words fail us when it comes to God.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, one of the things I like about the King James Bible is it keeps a distinction between believing in and believing on. And so using the preposition in after belief kind of suggests that there's some kind of propositional content that needs to be assimilated. But believing on is a totally different concept. Like on the strength of something, it's like being given grace to be able to try to understand in the first place. It's just a totally different kind of concept. So I think that's an important distinction that English has kind of lost in later translations.
Yeah, right. Which is another way of kind of stating this, but yeah, that's a good one. So believing in versus believing on. Yeah. Other feedback.
I really enjoyed the point of counterculture because I've never seen myself as a mainstream kind of person. And some people might say Christianity is the mainstream religion, but if you look at mainstream media or social media or what people are doing in this consumeristic kind of world, the teachings of Jesus to me have never been fit into mainstream. The turning the other cheek, the doing unto others as you had done unto you, the loving, feeding those who need to be fed, clothing those who need to be clothed. So I really enjoyed that point of it.
Yeah, it's a challenge to be Christian in any culture, but I think American particularly, right? With our focus on the individual, we're very much an individual. We raise up the strength and importance of the individual rights, individual liberties. Pick yourself up by the bootstraps, right? We say things like that. All lovely notions, but also can at times, particularly when you get into our consumer economy and all that kind of business, we can get out of balance as Christians real easily and lose sight of what is really a really radical gospel. It's a very radical notion. Anything else?
I was just thinking how certainty and the way kind of what you were saying about our culture and there's certain ways to live your life to ensure certain outcomes. Like that concept to me is the opposite of faith, because to me faith feels like stepping off the edge of the cliff and not knowing where the ground's going to be underneath my feet. It's not reading the map and going, if I take this road, I'll get here. And that does feel countercultural, because and one person was saying that she tries to make herself available to God, that's how she sees her prayer and meditation, and a lot of times I feel like the things God is asking me to do are maybe scary or I can't see how that could work out. but it's the voice that I'm needing to follow, and I guess faith to me is just it's the opposite of knowing.
Yeah, I was reading a blog the other day that someone shared with me, and I was really struck because this person was really just writing this pretty elaborate reflection on an experience he had in the bank. And he basically saw, I think maybe a 10 or 12-year-old young boy, noticing people coming through the door and needing help with opening the door for them. And so he's just reflecting on how this little kid is doing something that, is very old-fashioned in his mind, holding the door open for people, particularly ladies coming into the bank. And it moved him to say, something to his mom and to introduce himself and then have his own reflection on his own upbringing and how he was raised to do that and so forth. And it just occurred to me that that's an example of slowing down and being in the moment, to notice those really subtle, to notice God in the everyday. Rather than finding God through a set of beliefs or through a creed that we need to sort of sign off on, it's being open to the experience of God in the everyday.
Well, sort of like that one woman said when she got to meditation, she understood how really each day, present each day. And, that's what they say with the, with people that worrying about what's happened doesn't change anything. So you're not really in the present then because you're still back in the past and you can't do anything about it. And worrying too much about what's coming up in the future, neither can you really have much control over, but what you do now can very much influence what's going in the future, or what you do now can very much maybe process or allow you to let go of that was in the past.
Mm-hmm. So I'll bring it to an end there. Take these discussion questions with you for further reflection during the week if you'd like, and ask yourself as you go through your day, through your week, how are my beliefs giving my life meaning? What are the things I give my heart to giving my life meaning? I heard lots of friends, family, my children, and then next week. I don't remember off the top what we'll focus on, so you'll have to come and find out. Anyway.